Hey, it's going good. How's it going with you?
It is going pretty good over here. So I guess just to start, what would be your um like inside flap cover short little spiel about yourself? Anything you want to say or yeah, anything at all, really.
Oh my. Well, my name is Bree or Brianne. It's whatever's easier. I live in Michigan over over here. Well, maybe that is mirrored, so it doesn't work, but over on the west side of Michigan. I live at a cooperative housing community, so I live at like a big house with a bunch of people. And I enjoy writing. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, awesome. And this month you wrote Harrison, Michigan, which it one of the stranger pieces I thought in this edition. It was great. It's a almost a stream of consciousness kind of just description of kind of this like prototypical kind of burnt out Midwestern town. Is that how you describe it? Do you take issue with anything I said, or what would you say?
Not at all. That's exactly how it is. It was a shithole.
Yeah, and personally, like born and raised in Ohio, and so like it was strangely, like eerily accurate, right? Like I knew exactly what you were talking about through the piece, right? I could see the like streets and I could see the town, and I like know what it's like to like I lived right outside of Columbus in Ohio, if you know where that is. But so like not one of these like more rural kind of towns that was hit really hard um once like the steel industries and stuff left. But like certainly, right, you drive 20-30 minutes past like the nice little suburb I was in, and you see these towns, and it's exactly what it's like. And so I guess my question for you would be, is that like a what influenced, like what influenced you to write that? Like what was the inspiration? Is it semi autobiographical, or just like, and of course you don't have to say if that is too personal, but what were your influences, I guess?
Yeah, well, I can say that that is completely 100% like an accurate telling to the best of my ability of Harrison, Michigan, which was, as I've been calling it, right where your middle finger meets your palm on the mitten. So it's like just as you were saying, just hanging off on nothing basically. But my inspiration for it was I'd always grown up in the city. I live in Grand Rapids. It's like the second biggest town in Michigan besides Detroit. And so coming from the city and going there was really interesting to me because it's like I'd never really spent time in the rural Midwest until like I worked out there. So I started working out there and it was just so bizarre to me how different it was and how much it felt like I wasn't in Michigan anymore when I was out there. Um, the people are so different. The people are just, all of them are such characters in a way that they're not like city people. It reminded me of like Flannery O'Connor's work, where there's just, she wrote about all these different kinds of people um, who are just caricatures of their settings. Like they were products of their settings completely. So I'm writing this memoir type thing, mostly to talk about how characters are products of their settings, kind of in that same way. But it starts with describing the setting and kind of getting reader familiar with it. So yeah.
Yeah, of course. This like it's touching very deeply, and what you just said on this way that the places we grow up in, and the things like the things that are just around us that are usually completely outside of our control, right? Like no one chooses to be born right in Harrison, Michigan, or to grow up there. Or I mean, those are really just like it is what it is. It's like a roll of the dice, and the way those things like shape us so deeply, right? Like, and there's no way to circumvent that, right? Like, you are a product of like where you were born, and like these experiences. And so I think it's deeply interesting and important for, like, I guess my thought when I was reading the pieces is, it's so interestingly poignant to like the time, right? And I think there's a lack of like fully understanding what these like places in the middle of the country, especially in the United States, are like, right? And like really getting like an understanding of it. It's a very hard thing to understand if you haven't like lived there or worked there, or right.
Oh,
Like,
totally.
yeah. So I wonder, like, was that your goal? Like, did you want to? What do you think of the Midwest, and of these Midwestern towns in general, right? Because like your piece is almost a dispassionate kind of view of, like, it's just a description of what it is, right? It's like very truthful. And so I guess my question would be like, what do you think of these places on a more like emotional level, if that makes any sense?
It does, totally. Well, I've been writing about that a lot too. And it's very much just a sad struggle out there. Like, it's full of poverty, it's full of exploitation, it's full of people who are not really in on the news, is how I could say it. Um, Pretty much there's this whole population of people out in the middle of like rural nowhere where they are very benighted, like very provincial people who are very kind because they're all about just like this intrinsic family kind of mindset. Because out there, you don't have like, it really comes down to the working class, and you really don't have such thing as like, say, like job hunting out there. You just have your job, and you're going to do your job for the rest of your life pretty much. And if it suits you, why leave? Like, I'm writing right now, I can exemplify this. I'm writing right now about we had this waitress that worked with us at Miss Ollie's Corner. This woman was 75. She was 75, and she was the only waitress there. But when you think about it, it's like, why would this old lady be working at this like topless strip club bar? And then it wouldn't make sense, like maybe in the city, but out there, it's like, she probably got that job like 50 years ago, and it found her well, so she stayed, because getting a job that's good and that's going to secure you is like really lucky. You get a job if you go door to door, or if you know somebody who knows somebody. And it's all like, it's not like corporate America out there, it's more like local America. So that, with what you were saying with tying into the emotional value of it out there, um it's just the cycle of poverty, though. You see these people who are very like kind and genial, like constantly are getting screwed over, though. And it's very interesting because it's very anti-government, and then you think that there's a savior. So um we had president recently who was thought to be savior, and so they're really into just getting out and getting saved, but they don't understand still that there is this exploitation going on of their resources, like the agricultural component of it out there. And but everybody's really friendly. It's just sad to see. Like, there's this girl that I worked with who, across the street from her, um, she lived in a trailer and just like the gutter streets. So she had, across the street from her, a house blew up in like a meth operation. And she was just saying that, like, gosh, I hate that this is happening. Like, I have like a little girl here at home with me. I don't want her growing up in this kind of place, but you can't really get out of there. And if you wanted to get out of there, it's like leaving behind everything that you know, because those are all your people out there. Like, you know, everybody knows everybody. So you're leaving pretty much what you've set up for your whole life, to go towards something that you don't even know is going to work out. So, but you're too poor to get out there, and it's too expensive to take the risk. So it's just this over and over again. Generations of people who are unable to leave and have opportunity. So
Yeah, I mean, it's like like it feels like getting like punched in the gut, just to like truly think about what it's like, right? To I mean, it is this like it's this hopelessness, this like immense pain, and yet there's so much. What blows my mind about like these towns, and like growing up in the Midwest, and like seeing these kinds of things is they never like your life can be as like horrific as possible, right? Like as you just said, like these like horrific stories of, right, the house down the street blew up because it was a meth lab, and all I want to do is like take care of my daughter, and yet they never lose the like just like genuine kindness to like individuals, right? Like in the Midwest, is everyone is always nice, right? Like they see you on the street, right? Like people wave, and like it's just like this. Even though there's so much pain, that like I don't know, it blows my mind that people are able to hold on to that like shred of humanity, and they like make you feel like you're a person, even though like their lives are like so difficult. And and that's kind of what you were touching on. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's really just it's like it's really hard to talk about, right? It's so like it's so sad, and makes you feel kind of so hopeless, right? Because it's so many people, and it's such a big problem, and why they're there, and like the exploitation, like you're saying, of like big agricultural organizations, and the offshoring jobs, and like gutting these towns, and leaving these people behind, and it leaves you with this kind of feeling of hopelessness, and like there's nothing we can do. And so um I guess my question to you would be like, what do you think we can do? Like what do you think the path forward is?
I think the path forward is, I feel like, okay, I was this from the city. I was this person. I was like, there's nothing out there in rural areas. There's nothing for me to learn out there. It's just bumfuck. It's just tractors and corn and nothing. It's just a big old pot of nothingness. Well, I was wrong. I I made when I was this was 3 years ago now. Three years ago, that I was living these stories, and I had just started dancing the summer before, and I went back to Central Michigan University, where I was completing my 5th year of undergrad. This was before I knew that I was going to go to grad school or anything. I thought it was my last year, and um, I was like running out of loans. I didn't know how I was going to afford anything. So I made the call now to go to work at Maselli's Corner, which was 30 minutes north of already a really small town. Um, and when I got there, it was just wild. I just did not expect that, because I had come from a club that was huge. It was like 30 girls a night kind of club. Well, this was 6 girls in total kind of club. It was so small, and just so like we used to smoke cigarettes in the bathroom, and guys used to come in there like already drunk sometimes, and it was silly. And well, actually no, that's not characteristic of Maselli's. That is actually characteristic of every club, so never mind. But anyways, I would not have gone up there if I hadn't have gotten the job, like no way. But I think the next step is just understanding that this world is so much bigger than we think it is. We're all like kind of in our bubbles. Like there's no escape from it. We're always going to be. So just going up and meeting people and getting familiar with what's going on, because it's not just the exploitation or anything. There's still stuff going on that is very in need of justice. There is native reservation right to the north of Mount Pleasant, and that is in rural nowhere. So you have this population of Native American individuals who live on the reservations, and then you have a population of Native American individuals who do not, and they are assimilated in with the 98% white people out there. And I think we think of rural Midwest as all, bumfuck white people, but there is a lot of strife going on with the Native Americans in those white communities. There's a lot of violence, a lot of discrimination and hatred, and the perspectives of the Native people is really, really just something else. I did not know all of that was going on until I went up and I visited, and I would meet people who, like one of the girls that I work with was, she was half Native, and she was telling me all these stories about this and all of these things that are happening and all of what the relationship is between Indigenous and white people. And it was an experience and these talks that I really treasure. So there's a lot going on up there, and there's a lot of racism, people who are very proudly racist. She was just terrible. Oh my God. She would just, I would call her out sometimes, and she would be like, well, how can I be racist? I'm Native. And I'll like, no, Olivia, that's not how it works. And going up there and trying to see where the corruption is coming from and how it's being manufactured, how it's being sustained by generations of people who are just full of hateful ideologies, and understanding that education is not really a thing out there. Like, people will drop out of school at like 16, 15 years old, and that'll be that. Then they'll be working with their dads in the yard on the trucks, or they'll be waitressing, or they'll be farm wives, or they will continue the farm. School is something else. So, and that's where a lot of that cycle comes from. It's like you don't get out of your myopic scope. You don't really get to understand how big the world is. They're just as in a bubble as we are. And even though it's different, everybody in a way is sheltered. So it's like really sad to know what's going on. It's really sad to see all this and know there's nothing you can do, but at least I can go up there and I can say, hey, this is wrong. I'm gonna let people know why it's wrong and what's going on, where the wrongfulness is coming from, and try also to bring my perspective with me. But eventually, like 7 months later, I got her to say that it was really stupid of her for what she'd been saying before. And it's just, you become friends with people who you wouldn't expect to become friends with as soon as you try to see the human in them instead of looking for something that's like similar to you. I was the odd one out up there. I'd never been the odd one out before because I'd been in the city before, and it's like, if you are spreading hateful ideologies, we don't want you in our circle. We don't want you here. We don't want you around us. We don't want you representing us. Well, up there, it was like I was in a changing room full of people who were not like me at all, and I was the one who was uptight and needed to conform to their ideologies. And of course, I wasn't going to, so I had to think of different ways of assimilating myself so I could still work and make money. But at the same time, I was very intrigued, more intrigued than I thought that I was going to be, just by how you can connect to somebody with like your own humanities, and just like calling people out on bullshit calling myself out on my own bullshit, a lot of learning, a lot of growing. And I didn't expect it to be like right there. Like this is only an hour and well, it's actually 2 hours away from me here in Grand Rapids, half an hour away from me when I was in Mount Pleasant. But the fact that this kind of environment exists so close to me, yet is so different, just still blows me away. So, what do you think?
That was there was so much there that I thought was so valuable. But I think the thing that you really hit on that I like deeply resonated with me was this idea that it's about like the only possible, right, like the way I see it, especially in the US, right, like we're constantly like, or at least recently, right, we're pushing ourselves farther and farther apart, right? We're like driving this divide between it doesn't matter, right? Democrats or Republicans or city people and rural people, and there's this constant divide as if like we're not, and there's this loss of this understanding of our common humanity, right? And this like, well, those are the like other people that disagree with me, so like I don't discuss it with them. I just kind of like shun them out of my circle, and this desperate need, if we're gonna like move forward together as like one country or like one unit, to go outside of like our bubbles, our echo chambers, and discuss with people that like we don't agree with or understand, and not from a place of like shame or I'm better than you, or like admit that like I'm right, but from a place of like you're another human being and I want to understand you, and like in doing that, like you better yourself and you better them, and like that's the only way to actually change someone's mind, right? Like you're not going to go to someone with like a racist ideology and like um moralize and get up on your soapbox and like preach to them that like you're a better person and that they're terrible, and like that's going to make them change their mind. But like maybe if you like are like, why do you believe this? Like tell me about your life. Like I treat you like you're a real person with value, then I have a chance of actually changing your mind, right? And it's through that. And of course, like with the project here at the Void, it is like, and I think one of the most distributable ways of doing that kind of communication and facilitating that kind of communication is through literature, right? Like there's no, I don't care how much of like a coastal elite or like you've only ever lived in a city you are, if you read, right, your piece in the Void, I don't think there's a part of you that can't start at least to understand that like there are people that are so different than you, like so different and yet still human, but like you're forced to grapple with the fact that people are so different. And I think that is like, if we can't figure out how to bridge that gap, right, the understanding that you are so different than me, but like we have an underlying common humanity, so like there's a level of like respect and like wanting to understand and learn and like be open. I think that's that's the only path we have.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree with you right there, for sure. Um, yeah, there are people who are so different than us, right? Like so different than us. I've like through my job is really interesting because I feel like it's full of narrative, it's full of philosophy, and it's full of poetry. And it's full of, most importantly, it's full of characters. Like all these girls that I work with, there there's so many of them that are just such unique individuals that I wouldn't have encountered anywhere else. Like, if you want to go learn about the world and about people and about where they come from and about how society works on several levels, go to a strip club changing room. And then from there, if that's not enough, go out onto the floor and see how these men interact with you and do different experiments. It's so much fun. It was never just about making money for me. It was always also about the narrative. It really interested me. Just the fact that you could go to work and have a different name and become somebody else and just meet different kinds of people. It's like so freeing because nobody really knows you. And when nobody really knows you, you can't mess up. So I was feeling like I can't mess up here no matter what. and it really brought out this the true human condition of myself, and it brings it out of other people too. So that's a big part of it, is meeting people who are not like you and learning how to accept them.
Yeah, and that's super interesting, right? This it's almost as if this ability to kind of drop everything that makes you you and kind of pick up a different personality. You said it's freeing in like such a like a significant way because like and you talked about this before is kind of like there's this almost like inbuilt social pressure like once you like establish yourself in the world kind of right like you have your friends and like your friends are different than you but like likely similar in like lots of ways and you guys have like a common understanding of each other and there's this kind of unspoken social pressure that like if I were to step outside my like group of friends or the people I know or the places that I'm like welcome and like try to interact with like people I completely don't understand or people that are looked down upon by like my social group or whatever, there's this like inbuilt reaction to say like that they're gonna like look down on me, right? I'm gonna have this kind of rejection from my social group and we're deeply like social creatures. So like that terrifies us in a way and it kind of pushes us back into our bubbles and our echo chambers. But something about the ability to drop that whole personality that we've constructed and like pick up a new one and just use that as kind of this like blank slate to explore the world from like new eyes and new understanding. And I think that's it makes me it makes me deeply hopeful, right? Like that's a vision I can see. Like if we could just do that, right? If we could just do a little more of that, right? And there'd be like so much less hate and so much less animosity and so much less division if we could just remember how to like just talk to people, right? Like and just try to understand them.
Yeah, I think we I don't think that we know that we're like so much more the same than we are different. Like really, we really are. And I really learned that going up there, but I live in a co-op too. So I live at a co-op and we got like something like 20, 25 people here. I don't know. I've lost count, but it's basically just like a big mansion in Grand Rapids and with a bunch of people. And we all work together with the same goals and we have our own creed and our own kind of understanding of what it means to be a good person. And all the people here are really, really good people. Um, but it's all about like but they're all very different from me as well. I would have never met the people here if I hadn't have moved into the co-op. And it's kind of just like the same that goes for when I was working with those other girls at Sally's Corner. Um, Everybody has a common ground eventually, I really believe. And also everything that I say is just, I don't ever want to proclaim the truth. It's just theory. Everything that I proclaim is just theory. My theory is everybody is much more the same than they are different. So, but you learn that when you try to put yourself in surroundings where you wouldn't have met the people that you were with in that surrounding. So I encourage people to go out and do it because it's fun. First of all, second off, you learn a lot. Third off, it'll give you something to write about. Just it's just good. It's just good to meet people who are not like you. And working at that strip club up north, I would see what happened was in grad school residency, I had all these friends up in the residency, and we would be talking about stuff and sharing stories, and they'd be like, "Oh, Brie, you've got to write some of this down." And I said, "Well, maybe in like 10 years. Maybe in 10 years I'll write a book about this." But then I read Eileen Miles' Chelsea Girls, and that is a like memoir, very raw memoir about like some messed up things that this narrator person did. And I wrote out one of my stories kind of in response to one of their stories. And I was just like, my life is just as crazy, Eileen Miles. Let me tell you about it. So I just like wrote one out too. Um, that was fun. And then I turned it in for a grade, and my instructors were like, "Bree, you've got to write more of these, and we're gonna make it like a project for you. You've got to write more of these." And actually, Harrison, Michigan, is one of the oldest um, parts of that my manuscript. Now, I wrote it like quite a while back. Um, and it was one of the first things that I workshopped with my workshop group with that book, because that entire book only started out as 7 pages, and now it's 65,000 words and counting. So I didn't know I had that much to write about it, but anyways, I've been working on that book a year and a half now, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been really challenging. The challenging thing about writing memoir, though, for me, is that I just want to go back to writing fiction. I just I get like, I wouldn't say bored, but I definitely get bored. I do. I'm tired of not being able to just say fuck it. Let's get rid of gravity, But there are still ways that you can write realistically and still find a way to escape into the unreal or the not reality. Or as there's actually this is actually really funny, but the Void contacted me, and they also contacted this other person that I've been corresponding with about different theory. And so his name is Jonathan. He's great. And we were talking about just this hypothetical scenario when we were workshopping together, and how you have a very realistic plot, and then you can go off into this hypothetical scenario that has, this might not make sense without a piece in front of me to illustrate it. But for example, the one that I had workshopped was about the strip club outside. There is this huge sign outside the strip club, this big marquee sign, and there is this stripper on the sign, like really bigger than life size, like, and it looks like she's waving down to you. It's like a silhouette of a girl on the sign outside on the curb, and she's waving down to you. And I was like writing that, and then all of a sudden I went off into this tangent about this stripper girl and all that she has seen drive past her. And then I went into this crazy story, this hypothetical story about this like, it's very weird. I don't know why I wrote this, but it's just very weird story about something that might have happened, that might have crossed her path. That's just hypothetical. And then I went back into the actual reality of the story. And I feel like lately that's been a lot of fun and a big theme in it, but I've been realizing that escaping reality is kind of like the whole purpose of dancing and why people come to the club. It's all about escape. And so I just realized that I was like kind of like mirroring that the other day, and I think I want to keep going with it, but it's fun. But when you like I was saying, when you want to meet people who are not like you, it just sparks more imagination and more feeling and the hypothetical of what could be. There's just, this world is just so endless. And when you write fiction, especially, meeting people who are not like you is so important, because it just gives you so many ideas. Like, you don't know people can be like that. You don't know settings and places can really be like that. Just half the time I was in awe. The address of that place was 6969 East Gladwin Road. Like, what the fuck? And I just thought it was so funny, and nobody else thought it was funny. Like, why am I the only one who thinks that's funny? I don't get it. And just like I have a lot of stories from that, only just that 7 months that I worked there. But
Yeah, again, so much in there is so valuable. I think what you said about right, this escapism in fiction and in writing, and this ability to like explore different things and what could be, is something that like is probably my favorite part about writing and reading, especially, is this ability to explore and like feel as if you lived something that like you never could possibly have lived, or like you get this like deeper understanding of like what it means to do something or be something. And it's strange that like in fiction, allowing us to break the rules, right, allowing us to subvert reality and do things, right, like imagine what it's like to be the silhouette of like a girl on like this stripper club sign, like watching, like that's pure fantasy, but like there's value in that, right? It's strange, and it's one of the things that I think is like most valuable about fiction. And I was just thinking like the way you described, right, like shifting narrative, right, and as we shift further and further away from reality, right, into this more kind of surrealist space. um I don't know if you've ever read any of like the kind of like late 20th century like postmodernists like Thomas Pynchon and Don DeLillo and David Foster Wallace. But like I love, that's like my jam. Like I love that like tradition of like writing, and I think that's something that they play with a lot, right? Which is like this, they are constantly blurring the line between realist fiction and like this surrealist fiction. Or even I was talking earlier with another one of the authors, and he mentioned that the South American tradition, with this magical realism, is a very similar kind of technique, right? With Gabriela Garcia Marquez and Cortázar, and them are constantly like, here's a scene that feels so real, and then at the last second, I'm gonna inject like this thing, this like surrealist element as if it's normal. And there's something about that that's like freeing, and allows us to feel more and see more and take on new perspectives and learn more, I guess. And that's kind of what I latched onto from what you said. Have you read those people? Like, what do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, I love Thomas Pynchon. The Crying of Lot 49 is one of my favorite books ever, ever. Um, I also, as far as like those postmodernists goes, have you read Donald Barthelme? You'd love him.
I have I have
You would
not, but
love him. He has this one book. Well, he's got a couple. Let me get him. He's got, this book is called 40 Stories, and he's got 60 stories because he's Donald Barthelme and he can. But you might really, really like his stories. If you like those other writers. I love Don DeLillo too. I love White Noise. That's all.
yeah,
I love that book.
I just read White Noise. It is fantastic.
Oh my gosh. It's like the dialogue in there is like, it's like outer worldly. It's very realistic, but it's like not at the same time. And I love
It's
that.
so, yeah, it's so perfect that it's off, but you can't quite place why it's off, right? Like it's so, you're like, it seems normal, but like there's this whole swirling underlying substructure of the book where it's like it feels just like someone turned the dial just a little bit, right? Like it's just a little bit eerie and off. It's fantastic.
So I have a friend who was reading White Noise too, and she was like, you know, this person, more of a poet, and coming from a poet perspective when reading, and I come from more of like a literary fiction perspective when I'm reading, so I look for different things. I look for more the craft of like, how is this person writing this? How do they accomplish this and make this good? But my friend, they were looking at like, what are the big themes of this book? Like, what is the book trying to say? And how does it say it through poetry? And at first, this person, my friend, they did not like the book, which I like was like, what's wrong with you? But then I got it because they were looking at it from a place perspective of a poet. And yeah, it was all about our obsession with disaster and not wanting to be close to it, yet wanting it, kind of. Like, I had a really good time with the themes of that book. What did you think?
Yeah, it is like a, it is like an obsession. It is like a commentary on, right, like this obsession we have with death, and yet our need, death and disaster, right, and yet our need to distance ourselves from it. But like, it's this weird paradox where like in attempting to distance ourselves from it, we bring ourselves closer to it in like this weird kind of way. And I mean, I just thought it was a brilliant commentary on what, on kind of like modern Western societies, ignorance and like deep attempt to ignore like the reality of death and the reality of like disaster and pain in the world, and how like in our attempt to ignore that, it actually ends up making us deeply unhappy, because we all like at a level know it's true and inevitable, but like, and so like in our attempt to ignore that, we like torture ourselves, right, and we spend our entire life attempting to avoid this thing that we know we can't avoid. And at least
Mhm.
that's the thing that stuck with me about the book. But there's so much, and like DeLillo is such like a complex writer, and he pushes so many themes into like everything he like writes. So
Yeah.
what did you think about it?
Oh, I thought it was excellent. It's also one of my favorites, honestly. Um, I just yeah, it's like surreal, but at the same time very real. So it's just this. I love how he used his characters like as pawns. Like his characters were all such pawns meant to deliver these sort of ideas to you. You know, Don DeLillo types everything on a typewriter. He doesn't own a computer. And I mean, I second writing with a typewriter, because I mean, I got one of my own, and I highly recommend it because it forces you to go a little slower and lets you make mistakes without, um, you can't just press the back button. But I feel like that's him using the typewriter is like a whole different medium of like writing than it is like on like a word processor, because it forces you, like I said, to go slower. And I feel like it shows in his books. God, it must take forever though to write a whole book on a typewriter. I could not.
Yeah.
I could not write a whole book on a typewriter. Oh my gosh. But
I I remember hearing, I heard somewhere that David Foster Wallace would handwrite the first draft of his book. Like he hand wrote the first draft of Infinite Jest, and you're like, that's a 1,200 page book that you like wrote by hand. Like how did your fingers not like fall off? Like that's like, it's just, yeah. But there is something so valuable in slowing down, and that force, that being unable to, what you said, like hit the back key, right? Like we're so critical of like thoughts when they like first like kind of like vomit themselves onto the page, and they're usually like kind of disjointed, and you don't know exactly what you want to say. But like being forced to sit with the words and think harder about what you want to say without just being able to be like, just like scrap it, forces you to like kind of find what was valuable, why do you think that, and like sit with the writing more. And I totally agree with that.
yeah, totally. Lately I've been into a lot of like realism though too, because I have been trying to understand a little bit better. My studies lately have been in character and setting and how the two relate with each other, and how, like I was saying, characters are products of their setting. You know, for the longest time, I thought that characters and settings could be described in the same way. That was my theory, was you can describe a person and you can describe a setting using the same kind of interchangeable language, tweaked just a little bit, but the same idea. And then I have been doing studies in, as I was saying earlier too, like Flannery O'Connor's work. I've been doing some studies in her work, And it turns out my theory was wrong. These characters are products of their settings. So I have been trying to, with my book and my studies lately, I mean, I love the absurd, I love the bizarre, but I had to chill. Like, I had to sit down and in the real world and just like read some books that were a little bit more forward and clear and direct. You know, I love like Don DeLillo and Thomas Pynchon and Donald Barthelme, and I love like all of these postmodern absurdist writers, but I needed to sit down. And I feel like that's also very important too, because her work, Flannery O'Connor's work, is still very bizarre. It's still very strange. It's still very weird. It's just a little bit, just the language is a little bit more digestible, and it's very comforting, and it's very cozy. I also been reading, well, I also did a study in, I'm finished with my study in Richard Yates, but Yates is really, really good writer of interpersonal like difficulties. I mean, his book is called 11 Kinds of Loneliness, so, but he does, his stories are a little bit more singular character based, and his characters feel like they're kind of floating. But yeah, so I've been trying to ground myself a little bit more, and yeah.
Certainly. There is, right, there's this value in the absurd and in this kind of this surrealist space, but there is like this, you almost don't want to let yourself get too caught up in the fantasy, or this like strange surrealist world, right? You have to bring yourself back to earth and kind of it gives you a better understanding of kind of where this need for the surrealist and the absurd comes from, if that makes sense, right? Like in understanding that, like, right, reading more traditional narratives and like realist novels, like I just finished the Brothers Karamazov, which is like old school Russian Tolstoy, Dostoevsky style realist narrative, right? There's no magic, there's no like, no, they're trying to recreate the human experience as real as they possibly can. And there is, right, and you'll notice exactly what you said with Flannery O'Connor, right? Like the real life is strange, it's weird, and weird stuff happens, and exploring what people really think and like how they act, and you're like, that is in its own way just as like strange and surreal and absurd as Pynchon and DeLillo and those kind of writers. It just doesn't feel quite that way because like it's what we're used to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
So
totally does. Oh, sorry. Go on.
no. I was just saying, I'm just spitballing at this point. I don't know if that's just what I'm coming up with on the
No,
fly. I don't know if, yeah.
you know what?
So
You're
what do you
right,
think
though.
about that?
You're
Yeah.
right. You know, I was having a little bit of trouble with that, and so I actually wrote. Okay, so if you have a writer you really like and they're still alive, write to them. I wrote to George Saunders, and he wrote me back in a letter, and I was asking him about, you know, surrealism, realism. What do I do? If you haven't read The 10th of December, do it. It's great. It's great. He's amazing. And he told me, I have it pinned up on my wall because I was just like, oh my God, when I got that in the mail, I screamed. But he says, so I think of myself as a realist, but like a realistic realist, he says. I want to account, albeit somewhat cartoonishly, for the way things actually are and how they happen. But that requires some departure from what we usually think as sensible or real. And so this idea of being a realistic realist, and reading that in the letter that he sent back to me really meant a lot to me. So I've been thinking back on that, and he says something really funny too. What's absurd to me is a straight realistic story where everything is calm and makes sense and people behave rationally, because I've not found the world to be like that at all. And he's right. There is so much bizarre in the mundane. But Yeah, it was fun to write to your favorite writers and authors if they're still alive. Seriously, I was so floored to get a response. But and what I was saying also is, how's your writing going? How's your process?
Um, it's good. It is. Oh, what is my process like? I like to do a lot of like free writes by hand is kind of where I think like the best ideas come from, and so like just like a notebook, and like if I have an idea or like a scene that I want to develop or something like that, I just kind of like let it flow and kind of like not right, like not worrying about like, is this sound correct, is this the best phrasing, right? Like am I getting across what I need across? And like in doing that, I think that I personally come to a better understanding of what I want to say and like what the goal is, and a better understanding of like I, it's so strange, like when you write a narrative with like characters, it's almost as if you're in conversation with the character that you're building, which is a strange, like it's just that's such a weird kind of experience and a weird way to describe it, because it's like if they're coming from your imagination, how are you in, like how are you discovering things about a character? But like that's exactly what it feels like. um so yeah, it's a lot of that, and then I move it over, as I transition it over from like handwritten to like my computer. I do a lot of like editing, and that's where I kind of like try to trim it down and like reformat and make it sound how I want it to sound and stuff like that. But as for like projects or anything I'm working on right now, I mean, I wrote the short story um, for the October edition of The Void, which I like worked a lot on, and I have like a number of other short pieces that I like play with. Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so what would you say your focus is on lately? Like, what have you been enjoying writing? And that's
Yeah,
very general.
so yeah, of course. I'm actually a philosophy major, so I actually right now I've been writing a lot about I've done less fiction than I've wanted to, and I've done but I've been kind of stuck on these like essays about problems and like things that I think are like relevant or important, and I've written a lot about like the like just basically not for anyone else but for me to try to get my thoughts in order about the protest movements we've seen all summer, and the election and politics and these divisions in the country, and I've just been thinking a lot about like kind of what you said, right, about narrative and our lack of common understanding, and how we could possibly rebuild that, and that's basically been my focus, and it's been a lot of like nonfiction essay style writing recently.
Cool. Essays are so important. They're just so, they're like, are they like personal essays?
Yeah, I do them in, well, true to form and tradition of like the postmodernists and stuff. I try to write them in like interesting and subversive styles, right? So I have a personal vendetta against the way the like traditional academic essay is forced to be written, right? In this very formal language, using these very like formalized terms as if they're written for like a very like, because they're written for a very like niche audience. Um, but I think that's like a huge mistake basically in academia, to write like important essays and papers like that, because um, it isolates unnecessarily so many people, right? Like it's very hard for someone who's never studied like neuroscience to pick up a neuroscience research paper and like understand what's going on. But and it's not for like lack of IQ or like ability to understand, it's for like there's a bunch of jargon in there that like they don't have the definitions for, because they're like weird usage terms that are only used like in that sector of academia. And this is a huge personal rant that I'm getting on, but like I think that's like sad, and we're losing a lot of knowledge that like we could like have as like that could be more general. And if we just kind of like gave up on this, like we have to make it sound professional, or like sound like I know what I'm talking about, or went to the right schools, or like got the right degrees. So I try to write in this very like layman's style, to try to, I don't know, to try to avoid doing that, right? To try to avoid sounding, and you also like end up sounding, if you try to write like that, especially about topics you aren't super expert in, you kind of end up sounding like pretentious and like you like know more than you actually like, you know less than you're like attempting to like put forward that you do. So I don't know. I love that kind of style of essay writing, and I pick up a lot of it from David Foster Wallace, who wrote these collections of essays that are written in these very strange colloquial styles, and yet like impart so much knowledge. So yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Totally. That's
no,
so
yeah.
important. So, did you ever read John Didion?
John Didion. Oh, I think I may have in high school, but it is so, I don't remember any of it.
She has a book called The White Album, like the Beatles album, The White Album.
Hmm.
It's amazing and you need to read it. Like seriously, it is incredible. It is a collection of short stories. She kind of mirrors David Foster Wallace a little bit and what she's like doing. But she's just a very curious lady. She's just curious about everything. And her curiosity had her just writing essays about what she found out about the world as she explored in directions that she felt like she was interested in finding out more about. So she's got like all of her books are essay books. They're all essays, but the one that I really love is the White Album. And I would show it to you, but somebody has it and I don't know who it is. Somebody has my copy of the White Album.
That's awesome. I've got like 4 or 5 fantastic recommendations from this conversation. So this has been so great. We are running close to our hour, so I will let you go.
Okay.
But I do have to end with what I call like the most cliche of cliche questions for like writers and writing interviews. But the question I will leave you with is, if you could pick, and this is like an impossible question to answer, I know, but like if you could pick, if you were talking to someone who like loved to read and you had to pick like 3 to 5, whatever, must read books, what would they be?
Oh my gosh. Well, if it's just any person, I'd recommend them Jesus' Sons by Dennis Johnson. That's like my favorite book. That's a really important book, is Jesus' Sons by Dennis Johnson. And then I would also recommend them, probably 10th of December by George Saunders. And then, I mean, I feel like it just depends on the person, because like Donald Barthelme isn't for everybody, but he's also like my favorite writer. But I'm just gonna go classic and say Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. For real.
Fantastic. That's a great list. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm certain we will have you on again, and we look forward to everything more publications in the void, where I'm super excited about this manuscript that you're writing, and I can't wait to see it. If it holds a candle to the other stuff of yours that I've read so far, it's going to be fantastic. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, and have a nice day.
Oh, thank you. You too.